liberal Democrats and progressive activists have grown wary of the state of the 2016 presidential race, chafing at Hillary Clinton's Big Ten courtship of Republican leaders they have long opposed and fearing the consequences of shaping the contest as a referendum on Donald J. Trump. While few have questioned the electoral strategy of bringing Republicans into the fold by casting Mr. Trump as a singular threat to democracy, both skeptics and some admirers of Mrs. Clinton have come to view her decisive advantage in the polls with mixed emotions. She may win by a mandate-level margin, they say. But what, exactly, would the mandate be for? In a matter of weeks, beginning with the party conventions, the policy-driven debates that animated the Democratic primary race have largely disappeared from the political foreground, giving way to discussions of Mr. Trump's temperament, his inflammatory remarks and even his sanity. If she's going to get anything done as president, she is going to have a mandate, said Robert B. Reich, a Secretary of Labor in Bill Clinton's administration who supported Bernie Sanders in the primary. The subject of Mr. Trump's temperament was unavoidable, Mr. Reich said, but temperament doesn't give you a mandate to do anything. Mrs. Clinton's dogged pursuit of Republican votes has especially rankled progressives, and highlights the divisions within the Democratic Party, even as they see a victory more likely. They have grumbled at her eager promotion of endorsements from veterans of the George W. Bush and Reagan administrations, including that of John D. Negroponte, a top diplomat and intelligence official under Mr. Bush. They worry aloud that Henry Kissinger, of whom Mrs. Clinton has often spoken fondly, could be next. Secretary Clinton's decision to aggressively court Mitt Romney's base has her looking more and more like Mitt Romney every day, said Benjamin T. Jealous, a former NAACP president who initially supported Mr. Sanders. That's not a good thing. By most measures, the Democratic Party's left flank has had a banner year. Mr. Sanders' primary challenge pushed Mrs. Clinton conspicuously left, coaxing her into policy shifts on trade and college tuition. The party platform was, by virtually all accounts, the most progressive in history, and Mrs. Clinton has not made any perceptible changes in substance recently. Notably, a major economic speech from Mrs. Clinton on Thursday in Michigan would not have seemed out of place in the primary race, with discussions of expanded Social Security, debt-free college and a higher minimum wage. And on Friday morning, her campaign, sensitive to any suggestion that Mrs. Clinton might waver on promises to the left, emailed reporters a collection of 22 sympathetic quotes and Twitter posts from left-leaning leaders and organizations. She is not just running as the alternative to the other guy. She is running on a progressive policy agenda that she seriously believes will make a difference in people's lives, Brian Fallon, a campaign spokesman, said in an email. If she wins, it will not just mean rejection of Donald Trump. It will be a call to action on the issues she has championed. But the campaign's chief gambit since the start of the Democratic convention, depicting Mr. Trump as a menacing anomaly, disconnected from mainstream Republican thought, has already supplied Trump-averse conservatives with an opening. Even if Mrs. Clinton wins big, Republicans opposed to Mr. Trump's rise may argue that Americans were not voting for her policy proposals. Some are not waiting. Clinton is not likely to emerge with a legislative mandate, said Rick Tyler, a former top aide to Senator Ted Cruz's presidential run. She will have to start from zero in terms of selling all her policy proposals. They will not have been sold through this process. Mr. Tyler, who believes the 2016 election has effectively been decided, predicted a common refrain from Republican legislators next year. We didn't see that the people voted for that, we see that the people voted against Donald Trump. In interviews, elected progressive leaders, activists and local lawmakers made clear that their top priority remains defeating Mr. Trump. Most cautioned that the race was a long way from over, despite a wave of encouraging polls for Mrs. Clinton. Still, some liberals fear their leverage has been diminished, though the vast majority of Sanders supporters have rallied to Mrs. Clinton's side, if sometimes tepidly. If she can win without generating excitement among that already distrustful wing of the party, they reason, she may be less inclined to accommodate it once in office. We need the broadest popular front against Donald Trump, said Bill Lipton, a founder of the Working Families Party. The challenge for the left is, if that's all we do, we're saying anyone 1 degree to the left of David Duke is okay with us. Many of Mr. Sanders' backers believe that two of the principal issues he raised during his primary contest against Mrs. Clinton, her foreign policy hawkishness and her Wall Street ties, remain central to her political core. I fully expected that we would be at war with the Clinton administration, if there is one, said Jonathan Ticini, a former union leader who challenged Mrs. Clinton in her Senate primary in 2006. Once she is elected, I suspect she will go back to being what she is, which is a relatively moderate, centrist, corporate Democrat. Helen Jim, a Philadelphia City Council member who supported Mrs. Clinton in the primary, said the dynamics between Mrs. Clinton's team and the party's activist base reflected a fragile negotiation. The coalition has to hold together, she said. Is a Clinton victory synonymous with a progressive victory? It depends. I don't think I can give a full yes or no. Meganellia Green, a St. Louis alderwoman and Sanders delegate, said she feared Democrats were squandering our New Deal moment by not focusing voters' attention more intensely on the issues that powered enthusiasm for Mr. Sanders. Mrs. Clinton and her team have long ago grown weary of any implication that she is not entirely committed to liberal causes, repeatedly presenting her as a fusion of pragmatism and idealism. She has called herself a progressive who likes to get things done. In both of her presidential primary runs, Mrs. Clinton accused her opponents, first Barack Obama in 2008, then Mr. Sanders, of promising more than they could credibly deliver. But when approached at her rallies, even zealous Clinton supporters are often hard-pressed to name a signature policy proposal of hers. Her speech in Michigan touched on, among other things, a planned and $275 billion infrastructure investment and green energy spending. Mr. Fallon noted that Mrs. Clinton has pledged to act on issues ranging from immigration reform to gun safety. On some such measures, she has promised to pursue executive action in the face of possible congressional resistance. Recent unease from the left has often centered more on presentation and messaging than on the merits of her proposals. Her policy proposals are admirably detailed, but they cover so much ground that their whole is less than the sum of their parts, Mr. Reich said. She really needs to focus on a few big ideas. Some Clinton allies have argued that the most pressing goal should be to run up the largest possible margin of victory, which could enable the party to seize down ballot seats that might be unwinnable in an ordinary year. And a number of candidates in such elections, including some elevated by Mr. Sanders, have said it is incumbent on them to frame their races as something more than a Trump litmus test. It's up to us, said Pramila Jayapal, a Washington state senator who recently won her primary in a run for Congress. Adam Green, a founder of the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, said Mrs. Clinton's efforts to cast a wide net and train voters' attention on Mr. Trump amounted to a double-edged sword. Republicans in Congress won't grant as easily after the election that we won a huge mandate on progressive issues, but thanks to Donald Trump, we might have more progressives and majorities in Congress, Mr. Green said. I'd rather have a Republican minority in denial about what just happened than a Republican majority standing in the way.